international coverage. From Mexico, we're going all the way to Argentina. And this question is coming from the university in Córdoba.
Córdoba, adelante.
We are very much interested in the question that Mexico just made. I would like to ask Mr. Hinton to elaborate a little bit more on the characteristics of leadership during crisis times. And how can a leader, what can a leader do in order to change the mentality and idiosyncrasy or culture in companies that have completely different ideas from what we are just talking about over here?
Well, let me try to give you two examples, because I think it's a very good question, and it certainly is appropriate given the economic situation throughout much of North America, Mexico, or North America and Latin America. We are in a transition period globally in terms of the economies of our country, and it will require a great deal of perseverance on the part of leaders. So specifically, when you talk about how should a leader conduct himself or herself in a time of crisis, I'm thinking about, or I recall, how President Franklin Roosevelt of the United States rallied the spirit of the American people and the people of the world during the Great Depression of the 1930s. And President Roosevelt said that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And so I think it's important that a leader raise up his people so that they can overcome their fear and their resistance to change. And what I see happening throughout Mexico and Latin America is a discomfort on the part of so many leaders and managers who are resisting change. And you have to be able to embrace change if you're to grow. Otherwise, the competition will overtake you.
Continuamos la sesión de preguntas y respuestas ahora con la participación de los Mochis, Sinaloa.
And now we have a question coming from Mexico, Sinaloa.
Estado de Sinaloa. Adelante.
61942.
Escuchamos a los Mochis, Sinaloa.
Okay, now, Los Mochis. We lost it. We've lost the signal.
La llamada. Tenemos una pregunta de
Now we have a question coming from Venezuela, from the University, Central University of Venezuela in Caracas. What are the conditions, the organizational conditions in order for them to create and consolidate leaders?
I think what we're really talking about here is an ideal situation, and unfortunately there are no ideal situations in business or ideal conditions in business. However, to create an environment in which leaders can be born or developed, I think it requires a few things. Number one, you need to create that clear vision. I think secondly, be sure that your people have a role within the framework of that vision and the context of where your organization is and where it's trying to go. And then be sure to mentor and nurture your people, because that's how you draw out or expand their leadership skills and abilities. So you must create an environment in the organization that, and a culture within the organization in which people want to learn and they want to grow.
La siguiente llamada viene
Next
de
question is
Cuautitlán,
coming
México.
from
La escuchamos.
Cuautitlán, Mexico.
Gracias. Hablo de la Facultad de Estudios Superiores.
I'm calling from Cuautitlán, Faculty of Higher Studies.
Lograr
How can a leader
compartir su visión con
share his vision with his peers when the idiosyncrasy and mentality of a country is very highly individualistic?
Well, I would view that as an asset rather than a liability, that a company or a country is very individualistic. That tells me that you're about respect for people. And the challenge is companies have evolved in their structure to the point where you have this hierarchy where managers think they have all the decision-making responsibilities and that the workers are just there to do the work. And I think that's the gap that you're trying to close, and that's what you're trying to change in an organization, to impress upon management that workers have a brain and that if we would allow them to use their brain, that the organization would be more successful. So I think you have to tackle that on an individual basis within a department or a small work unit and try to close that gap.
Continuamos ahora con el módulo 2 en el que el señor Hinton
Well, now we're
nos
going
hablará
on with
sobre cómo
module
hacer
number
crecer su
2,
negocio
where
por
Mr.
medio de
Hinton
las
will speak
personas
about how
y
to
sus
grow your
organizaciones.
organization through your people.
Thank you for those excellent questions, and I look forward to more after this module. The second part of today's program deals with empowerment. My goals for this session are the following. First, I would like to provide you with my definition of empowerment. Secondly, I will offer you 5 factors that are essential to creating an empowered organization. And thirdly, I will share with you a brief case study that applies the 5 factors of empowerment so you can see them in action. The word empowerment is defined in the English dictionary as follows: to give power to authorize, to enable. These are valid definitions, but in the context of business, let me offer you a more specific definition which we can build on during this brief session. I define empowerment as the act or process of giving someone the capability, information, feedback, and recognition necessary to create a successful outcome. Empowerment is not a new strategy for business, although there has been renewed interest in empowerment in recent years because so many progressive companies have discovered that by empowering their employees, they can increase their company's productivity and customer satisfaction levels. Competition has forced businesses and governments to find more ways to become more productive and better serve their customer base. What businesses and government have realized is that by empowering their employees to accept more responsibility, they can increase their productivity while improving quality and customer satisfaction. This has been much easier to accomplish in business than in the public sector or government. As I said earlier in my definition of empowerment, it is a process or an act. In other words, a manager or senior executive cannot simply wave a magic wand and decree that all employees are now empowered. The process doesn't work that way. Empowerment is a conscious strategy by your organization that requires time, training, and resources. Here are the 5 factors we have found at the Customer Relations Institute that are necessary in order to create an empowered organization. The 5 factors of empowerment are: number 1, trust; number 2, willingness; number 3, capability; number 4, feedback; And number 5, recognition. Now let's examine each of these 5 factors of empowerment. Creating a culture of trust is the most important factor because trust provides the basis for cooperation and commitment between a manager and his employees. Trust creates a level playing field. Trust allows a manager to obtain the support of other departments beyond his direct domain so that his employees have access to information that is crucial to their decisions and ultimately their success. Trust is the source for all empowerment because without trust, managers will not commit their time and resources, and employees will not cooperate fully or do their part to ensure positive results, namely higher levels of customer satisfaction and quality. Empowerment is impossible if you don't trust your people. Please note here that up to this point, I've used the term managers and employees several times. One way to know that empowerment is working in your company or government agency is by a subtle shift in how your people refer to each other in terms of title, rank, or position. According to my colleague, Dr. Ellen Dohm, a noted quality expert and author from Upland, California, in the empowered organization, terms such as employees and subordinates give way to new language and references such as colleagues and associates. And so I would like to shift my language and from this point on begin to use terms such as colleague or associate when referring to your employees. My objective here, as Dr. Ellen Dohm suggests, is to help you become familiar with these terms, if you are not already, and start changing the way we think and act about our people. As a culture of trust takes root in your company or government agency, you will notice this subtle shift in the corporate language of your people. It is an important first step towards creating an empowered organization. A culture of trust is not something we should take for granted in our organizations. A lack of trust is the reason why many managers never fully support their colleagues and associates to succeed in a project. This is why managers reserve their judgment and only give associates and colleagues conditional support. After all, nobody wants to be associated with a failure. And middle managers are notorious for staying in their foxholes when the fighting gets heavy. Ironically, however, it is because managers withhold their commitment that most associates fall short of their goals and fail. What managers must understand is this: people cannot succeed unless management eliminates the policies, rules, and procedures that inhibit innovation and the freedom to fail. Another reason why trust never surfaces is management ego. In many industries, managers are becoming an endangered species, just like the dinosaurs. They are endangered because the world of business and government is changing. They are becoming more competitive, and as competition stiffens, businesses and governments must change their organizational structure. Most organizations are becoming flatter with fewer layers of authority. As companies downsize and reduce costs, they will require fewer managers and supervisors. Replacing managers are work teams consisting of 8 to 12 frontline employees who are responsible for developing their own productivity goals, quality control, and feedback systems. Understandably, managers do not want to become extinct like the dinosaurs. And so they react in predictable but negative ways. For example, most managers who find themselves in the middle of a chaotic reorganization, they resist change rather than take a leadership role and guide the change process within their organizations. They display their resistance by keeping tight controls in place and not allowing their associates access to information which prevents them from making decisions. Thus, a culture of trust is never established due to the ego needs of managers. This is counterproductive and merely postpones the inevitable. It is unfair to place all the blame on managers. After all, their response to reorganization and layoffs should be expected because nobody wants their position eliminated. The key question is this: what can a company do to convert its middle managers to support empowerment and create a culture of trust? One way is to not make middle managers victims of empowerment. In other words, companies and government agencies must find creative ways to reorganize themselves without terminating middle managers. Several companies that have faced these competitive issues, including IBM and several auto manufacturers, have created early retirement programs for managers, while other companies have reassigned their managers to different job responsibilities and work team roles without reducing their salaries and benefits. But in the final analysis, those managers who want to survive the global reorganization of business must prove themselves valuable and indispensable to their organizations. Senior executives who are savvy to the best and brightest among middle managers will make every effort to find positions and responsibilities for their best managers. There are other benefits to eliminating managers. In doing so, the company will also reduce restrictive work rules and eliminate outdated policies that inhibit productivity. Thus, there are fewer barriers and less layers of authorization for other employees to pass through in order to get permission or access to information to do something innovative or creative. This is why any layer of power within an organization is in trouble. This also includes unions. For decades, organized labor and their unions have been viewed by senior management as the encrusted layer within the company that hurts productivity and does nothing to enhance quality or customer satisfaction. Now, union leaders, like middle managers, must rethink their role and contribution to the organization or also face extinction. The emergence of the entrepreneurial age, that is, the tremendous growth among small and family-owned businesses with fewer than 100 employees, has seriously hurt union membership in industrialized countries. When we talk about empowerment and the trust factor, we should also consider the operations-driven organizational chart on your screen. This first chart depicts the hierarchical organizational structure with the traditional pyramid of authority being the managers, or M, followed by the supervisors, the letter S, and on the bottom of the pyramid are the employees, the letter E. In an empowered organization, the pyramid is flattened. There is still a management role, or M, but supervisors are replaced by working employees, signified by the letter E, who interact directly with customers, signified by the letter C. What these two charts represent is the difference between one organization which trusts its employees to take care of their customers and another organization that does not trust its employees. When it comes to how a company is structured and organized, the fact is that most progressive companies have looked into the crystal ball and seen the future. They understand clearly that their customers want products and services faster, better, and cheaper. This is why the old paradigms for doing business no longer apply. and they will continue to change abruptly for the foreseeable future. There is one other aspect of trust that I want to mention because it is forcing companies to rethink the way they sell their products and market their services. And that aspect is this: customer loyalty is declining. Consider the plight of Major League Baseball in the United States. Once you give your customers a reason to spend their entertainment money elsewhere, they will abandon you. It will be a long time before the crowds return to baseball stadiums. But customer loyalty is declining for two important reasons. First, our quality isn't as good as we think it is. My proof for this statement can be found in Detroit, Michigan, where U.S. automobile manufacturers have struggled to recoup market share lost to the Japanese when once loyal consumers throughout North America, Mexico, and Latin America realized that their Japanese cars were faster, better, and cheaper. Secondly, customer service remains mediocre. Yes, it has improved, but not enough. Most companies have a long ways to go before they will ever be able to live up to their inflated advertising claims that basically state, we're number one in customer service. You and I both know that too many companies talk a great deal about customer service, but they do not put their money where their mouth is when it comes to training and educating their employees to do the job right the first time. On this subject of customer loyalty, both Businessweek and Fortune magazines have cited polls that indicate customer service is mediocre at best. Fortune's recent cover story on the airline industry's poor customer service record is a clear example of why customers do not remain loyal despite all the gimmicks and contests the airlines offer travelers. In fact, one study revealed that if government agencies and utilities were completely deregulated and forced to compete in the open market for customers, they'd be out of business within a year because their customers would defect to the competition. I will ask you the same question recently posed to an audience of customer service professionals at a conference in New York City. How many of you would entrust your most important contract proposal to be delivered by the Postal Service instead of Federal Express or one of its worthy competitors? I think the vote today is similar to the response shared by the audience in New York City. It was unanimous in favor of the overnight delivery services. The fact is, we are only as good as our last service experience or finished product on the assembly line. And if our customer had a bad experience or even a mediocre experience, we run the risk of losing that customer because the consumer of today has too many choices. Competitively speaking, we cannot afford to miss the target with our customers. This is why the subject of customer retention, training, and things like that have gained such priority among senior executives. They want to stop the bleeding. It's too costly to replace good customers. And so we return to the issue of empowering our people to save the day for the customer and ensure a positive service experience. But if we do not trust them to do the job right the first time and fail to give them the support they need to succeed, then that lack of trust on the part of management will usually result in less than satisfactory results. Thus, trust is the most important of the 5 factors for empowerment. The second factor for empowerment is willingness on the part of the employee to accept the task and willingness on the part of the supervisor or manager to give the employee full responsibility for the task. When you ask an employee to take on another assignment or project, that employee must be willing to do the job and get it done on time and within budget. Not every employee, when asked to accept more responsibility, is willing. Too often, employees are pressured into accepting a job or task because the boss asked them to do him a favor. This is why the employee is reluctant to say no. Instead, the employee agrees and finds himself having to do something he really would rather not be doing. Let me give you an example of how an unwilling employee is compelled to enforce a rule or policy with which they disagree. This is the story of an 18-year-old female who works at an ice cream store chain in San Diego. Her job title is server. She takes the customer's order for ice cream and provides them with a cone or a cup of ice cream. This is not a difficult job, but it is a typical job for high school-age employees. In this particular story, the ice cream store manager became upset when several customers began arguing over who was next in line to be served. So the next day, the store manager